Welcome everybody to the seasonal diet, eating what our ancestors ate when they ate it, like we were evolved to do. Welcome to Mushroom Week. Now, mushrooms, they can grow at different times of year in different places in the world, and there's lots of different species, of course, but generally they are in top season in the fall because most of them need a dark and damp environment that is cool but not too cold like in the winter time. So right now, before the winter hits, is top season for mushrooms in most places in the world. So in this video, we are speaking about the edible mushrooms and their history in the human diet. So guys, mushrooms and any fungus is basically the oldest form of life on this planet, or one of them at least. Long before humans and animals and even insects or plants, fungus would be among the first forms of life in the world. So of course, they have been in the human diet as long as we have existed, and they have been a big part of our ancestral diet. The problem is, there are tens of thousands of types of mushrooms, and most of them can kill you if you eat them, so it probably took humans a lot of trial and error, tens of thousands of years, to figure out which mushrooms were good and edible and which ones are gonna kill you if you take a bite. And actually, it took us humans even longer to grow them safely for ourselves to eat. But let's look at the evidence we have from the most ancient of times. We have some archaeological remains in Chile that suggest mushrooms were eaten there up to 13,000 years ago or more. In Europe, the oldest archaeological basically preserved human that we have is Ötzi the Iceman. Most of you know him, a human that died buried in a glacier in Switzerland more than 5,000 years ago, and he had a couple types of mushrooms still preserved in his stomach. So it's safe to say that the earliest humans we know of ate mushrooms, especially going back to hunter-gatherer times, but it wasn't just in tribal cultures. It was the first written records we start to see of this food come from ancient Greece and ancient Rome about 2,000 years ago. Mushrooms were used in some of the earliest cookbooks we have records of, but it seems to be there even in these advanced cultures that they also still foraged these wild mushrooms. It seems, at least from what the historians can tell, that the Chinese actually were the first ones to cultivate mushrooms in the 600s or 700s. Europeans did not start to cultivate mushrooms until 1,000 years later, and it was about the 1600s, 1700s when they cultivated the first champignons in France. So that's a very long time. How is it that perhaps the oldest edible thing and perhaps the oldest very life on this planet, the mushroom, it was one of the last foods that humans begin to cultivate and get some control over? Well, mushrooms are very different than other plants because mushrooms, it's not as simple as just planting a seed and watching it grow. They don't come from seeds, remember, so originally to grow mushrooms, when humans finally figured it out, they would basically be watching for good flushes of wild mushrooms in the fields or in the forest, and they would dig up the soil there that was filled with the mycelium, and they would replant that soil in beds of composted manure. A lot of those grew, but a lot of them didn't, and they just got infected or didn't grow well. But as late as 1893, so we're talking just a little over 100 years ago, the sterilized pure culture spawn was discovered and produced by researchers in France, and then they added some horse shit to it, some manure, and that is basically when humans were able to successfully cultivate mushrooms on the wide scale, at least. So really, we've only had mushrooms cultivated for a little over 100 years now, and we've had reliable, easy access to mushrooms since then. We had it before then, but before then it would have been 100% foraged. So if you know what to do, that is a great option. If I'm in Norway, I would be out with my grandmother almost every single day at this time of year in the fall. It's a beautiful time to be out in nature too, and lots of great mushrooms to be found in many places in the world. But remember, seek help of an expert if you don't know the mushroom types already, because you should always be careful when foraging. But mushrooms are even more dangerous, so you really have to know what you're doing with that. So how about you guys? Any mushrooms growing near you? What kinds? What kind do you like? Most of them are really great this time of year, and definitely one of the oldest types of foods in all of our ancestral diets.